Okay. Well, again, thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for being here to on a Friday, technically evening. Yes. Well, my talk today is about the OpenNebula project, the way it's being developed till now, and the innovations that are taking place in the project right now. I'm going to give you an intro of what OpenNebula exactly is, and the kind of projects we're doing now, and how we are moving from context that was private, so coming from the private cloud environment, how we are moving gradually into the edge computing world. So that's me before the lockdown, and that was me as well a few years ago. Just happy that my talk is not taking place at the same time as John McDoug's talk, because there'll be a bit of a pity. And that one here, by the way. So OpenNebula is a cloud management platform. Some people refer to it as the operating system of the cloud, and I actually like that term. So we are an open source solution to build your own cloud. And we've normally and traditionally been used by companies and corporate users that want to set up their own private cloud on premises. They typically they are either looking for maybe an alternative to something that's a bit more complex and more expensive in terms of resources and money, something like OpenStack. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but yes, it exists. And sometimes some people want to, they have some infrastructure, they're using some, for instance, some VMware infrastructure, and they want to create a cloud on top of that. And we also offer that kind of potential. So as you can see, we are the middle layer between the networking, storage, and virtualization technologies that you need to deploy your cloud. So we offer all the tools that the cloud administrator needs to set up a cloud on these physical resources, to virtualize the resources and then offer them typically to their internal users or corporate users in a specific organization. The number of technologies that we work on, as you can see on the slide, we can either create this cloud on top of VMware, vCenter typically. You can create a fully virtualized cloud on top of KVM. You can use LXD system containers. We have a webinar on LXD next week, by the way, on Tuesday, with the technical lead from Canonical. So just have a look at the website if you're interested in LXD. And one of the big news we have for the new release that I'll be talking about in a bit later on is this new integration with Firecracker, which is it's Amazon Web Services new virtualization technology. It's a really interesting open source project to create micro VMs, and I'll explain you a bit more about what we're doing with Firecracker a bit later on. So on top of this virtualized infrastructure, you can use OpenNebula to deploy a number of services. You can use, obviously, virtual machines over templates, or you can create your own templates and create your own services, multi-VM services on top of that. Have users with different rights to use this infrastructure. You can arrange for different services and dynamic services as well as scaling your infrastructure as you need. And you can also use tools like Terraform or Ansible to make this deployment in a more efficient way. I'll also talk about a bit later about Docker and Kubernetes, which are also technologies you can integrate with OpenNebula in a way that helps you develop the workload for your DevOps requirements. So as I mentioned before, we've been a product that was born for the private cloud, for companies that needed a cloud on their premises. These sometimes has been used on in a hosted solution. What we've been doing in the last few years is a move towards, obviously, the hybrid cloud. So a number of integration with cloud providers, public cloud providers like Microsoft Azure and AWS, for people that actually need to have this elasticity, this degree of elasticity, and expand the resources they have in their private cloud and use some public cloud providers on the basis that they actually have their own infrastructure, and they just need to have some peaks of demand, and they need to integrate this infrastructure from a third-party provider. What we're doing now as well is moving towards the edge of this the cloud universe. And so we are embracing this concept of edge computing, which is sometimes for a bit theoretical. I mean, lots of people talking about the potential that edge computing is going to provide to companies. We are actually implementing a solution for this, and it's a solution. It's a solution that's going to be actually open source, and I'll explain you a bit about this a bit later on as well. On top of this solution, you can access our marketplace with templates and virtual appliances, and deploy a number of services, pre-configured services on top of your infrastructure in a very easy way. But things are getting a bit more complex. So why people use OpenNebula? Why people's been using OpenNebula for a while? It's a light solution compared with other products. It's quite simple, relatively simple in terms of deploying the whole solution and using it and maintaining it, as opposed to other products and other open source products, as you know. It's very flexible in terms of being able to most of the times doesn't take that long for you to adapt the product to your specific circumstances or your specific data center. It's quite robust. We've over the years we've been able to create a product that works pretty well. Obviously, we have bugs as everyone, but we have a community of users and developers and contributors that help us keep the product up and running and improving it. But as you'll see a bit later, there are some pretty large deployments in place, and we're quite proud of that. And it's quite powerful as well in terms of giving you all these different tools and alternatives for you to create the cloud, the enterprise cloud that you actually need, not the one that the provider wants you to have. In terms of simplicity, that's how the graphical user interface looks like. It's a simple web user interface, internal web user interface for the cloud admins or the users to interact with the solution depending on the role. And through this, through the front end, which can perfectly be installed in a single node, you can run a pretty big deployment. Behind OpenNebula, the product, there is OpenNebula, the company, the OpenNebula Systems. We are an open source company. The company was created to provide support to corporate users where they were actually adopting OpenNebula over the years, and they were demanding some professional services and support. As you know, and John Magdag was mentioning this a few minutes ago, open source as a business model is okay. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, we were all discussing about the different options and the potential that open source had to sustain a business model, and the other way around. So we are in that process. So we are an open source company. We provide a number of services. We've been changing the model lately, slightly, to adapt to some circumstances. But in the end, we are a company that provides some services on top of software that's open source. We are a company that's born in Europe, and we're also quite proud of these origins. And that's actually shaped some of the approaches we have to technologies, as we will discuss in a second as well. So a bit of history that we talk. The talk's title promise a bit of the past and the present of OpenNebula. So That's the timeline of the project. It was in origin a research project, so the project comes from the university, the Complutense here in Madrid. It was created as a research project, and then later on it evolved into a product that was used by corporate users, and that, as I mentioned before, led to the formation of an open source company to provide this sustainability to the project and a number of services for the users. So it's pretty old in terms of, relatively speaking. It's been around for a while. We've been adapting to the different changes in the context, different companies, different products emerging here and there, and coming from an academic background, I feel especially proud of being able to say that OpenNebula is the result of European funds and public funds that were well invested. So it's a project that lasted beyond the end of the project, and that's something that doesn't happen that often, unfortunately. But yes, it's one of the main characteristics. It's actually, as it was referred to at some point, is a success story in terms of public European funding. We've been running our OpenNebula conference for several years. We had to cancel this year's one, and we'll move it to next April. And one of the main things that have been taking place lately is this One Edge project I'll talk to you about in a second. It's this around 2 million euros funding we received last year from the European Commission to work on the first European open source edge computing platform. But I'll give you some more details a bit later. Yeah, as I said, pretty proud being this an example of this success story for European funds that have been well invested. So as a company, as an open source company, what we do is provide support. We provide support, and then we provide a number of resources for corporate users. We are now at a time where we are actually releasing. We used to have a single distribution of OpenNebula. Now we have two: the Community Edition and the Enterprise Edition. They are they're both fully featured, but then there are small differences in the way in which the Enterprise Edition gets maintenance from us, from the developers. We have this concept of OpenNebula Subscription, and that's the key for corporate users to unlock a number of benefits that we provide to those companies, mainly that are contributing back to the project through the subscription. That's how we see this mechanism. As part of this subscription, corporate users get the access to this Enterprise Edition I was telling you about, a number of tools to make the configuration a bit easier, access to our support team, and access to professional services, and then also to a number of exclusive resources for them. Apart from the Enterprise Edition, as I mentioned, there's the Community Edition. That's a fully featured version of OpenNebula under the Apache license. So we keep both tracks. Who's using OpenNebula? There are a number of companies and from different sectors. We don't have any specific solution for a specific sector, so we work all around. And for many different companies, telcos, IT, gaming industry as well, banking or public sector. There are, as I said, some pretty large deployments. We have the example there with this one of our users with 16 data centers all around the world, and it's a solution that works really well in terms of distributed infrastructure. So it's one of the solutions that corporate users look for when they're trying to adapt their infrastructure to the cloud. The big news we had last week, this week, earlier this week, was the release of our new version, OpenNebula 5.12. We normally work on stable versions. We release stable versions every 6 months. So we've been working quite hard for this one because it comes with a number of novelties, and we're really excited about this new release. It's going to open up a whole new world of possibilities for many people, because it integrates, as I said before, Firecracker, but also a number of other features. As it is a tradition with OpenNebula, we name the releases after a real nebula. So in this case, it's just to celebrate this integration with AWS Firecracker. We've named OpenNebula 5.12 after the Firework Nebula. So if you want to read more, maybe during the weekend you have to read some likely content. You can go to our blog, and then you'll see you can read this article about the actual Firework Nebula. As I said, we're really excited about this new release. It brings us a bit closer to what we want to do with this concept of edge computing, making this concept of edge computing something that works for people and for users. That's, on the one hand, this integration with Firecracker I mentioned, and the other one that's going to be really useful as well is the integration we've made with Docker Hub. So you can now run Docker Hub images and download Docker Hub images and run them as micro VM, and then you can let OpenNebula orchestrate the whole thing, and that's going to be really interesting. Integration with Docker Hub, it works now for our users as a regular marketplace for virtual machine templates. But now you can download these images, these containers directly from Docker Hub. And Firecracker, for those of you who are not that familiar with Firecracker, Firecracker is a technology that was developed by AWS. It's based on, it's an alternative to QEMU. It works on top of KVM. It's a virtual machine monitor. It lets you operate micro VMs. So they are much lighter. They are, safer than just a container. So what we've done is to integrate Firecracker as another virtualization technology into our stack. So now OpenNebula can manage Firecracker micro VMs as we've been managing KVM or LXD system containers, and that's going to be really powerful, especially for this edge computing approach as I was telling you about. So being able to very quickly orchestrate complex or multi-tier applications, downloading these Docker images from the marketplace, putting these containers inside a micro VM, and then orchestrating these micro VMs, either locally on your data center or sending these micro VMs to an edge location or different edge locations, and obviously using OpenNebula's orchestration layer and dynamic services to provide some elasticity to the whole deployment. So that's we're going to be releasing some tutorials and some screencasts about these applications in a few days' time. So if you're interested in DevOps, just have a look at the website or sign up for the newsletter, because there's some really interesting stuff coming very soon. And if you're interested in Firecracker, you want to explore more about this technology, just invite you to have a look at the website. It's an open source project, and there's a Slack channel, and there's obviously GitHub, and you can have a look at this in more detail. So I mentioned that 5.12, OpenNebula 5.12 brings us closer to what we want to do with this concept of edge computing, or brings us closer to our concept of edge computing, which for us and for our users, it means creating a platform that allows you to deploy things where you really need them, but on the basis that you control your infrastructure, and you control where exactly you want to put things, and you control, you minimize locking risks, you minimize costs, and that is the basis of this project, this One Edge project I told you about. And this is basically creating for us is this challenge of expanding OpenNebula from the private cloud and the hybrid cloud to the edge by creating this platform, or turning it into a platform that can be used for many companies to finally embrace, in practical terms, an edge computing approach. This fits into the trends we see in the market, and then obviously you all are familiar with these tendencies, obviously from the old mainframes to the client-server model, to a more centralized cloud, which is the model we've been seeing in the past couple of decades. Now what we're seeing is with edge computing and with the emergence of, for instance, a number of bare metal providers and a number of requirements from some specific applications and users, what we're seeing now is this tendency towards the distributed cloud. And that's where the edge becomes really useful, having bare metal providers that can give you this capacity to deploy services and applications at the edge. That's what we find really, really exciting. And that's what we are actually doing. So trying to overcome these limitations or these dependencies that arise from the public cloud model, which has been, for a number of years, has been promoted as almost the ideal move for a lot of companies. But then over time, many companies and many analysts have actually realized that despite all the marketing and all the budgets invested in promoting public cloud as this ideal solution, it actually comes with some problems for a lot of companies. Many companies cannot embrace public cloud directly. They have their own internal limitations. And in some other cases, a public cloud model comes with its own problems. Our approach is it's different. Where we come from, and it's in line with a number of initiatives that are taking place now in Europe, for instance, with the GAIA-X Initiative, in which we are participating, in terms of ensuring that companies, both users and consumers of cloud infrastructure and providers, can actually operate in an environment that's more open for competition and technological sovereignty, in terms of not being so dependent on a number of a tiny number of huge providers. And that's been identified as a main problem in Europe, and now it's been addressed by projects like, for instance, GAIA-X, for establishing this federated data infrastructure in Europe that connects local and smaller local cloud providers, with consumers in terms of consuming data, services, and infrastructure from these providers. And that's a really interesting project. And as I said, it fits completely with this idea of our approach to edge computing and our approach to what we call this elastic private cloud, being able to have more freedom in terms of moving resources, making your cloud elastic when you need it, integrating resources, hybrid, but mainly providers, edge resources from bare metal providers when you need to run applications or run some specific service closer to your end user. Bare metal providers come with their own benefits as well, in terms of portability, in terms of pricing, compared with a virtualized solution by a public provider. So it's a combination that we're quite confident that will be useful to a number of users and companies. What we're working now on is in creating or transforming OpenNebula into something like this kind of model, where you can run your own instance of OpenNebula, you can run your own private cloud, you can have your connectors with some hybrid providers, but You might also want to be able to access a catalog of edge providers in specific locations or with some specific requirements, and being able to deploy very quickly a number of resources or complex services on top of those resources, of those edge resources. So that's what we're working now on, unifying an interface for a number of environmental cloud providers to be able to connect with OpenNebula, and then for our users to be able to select the resources they want and very quickly from our marketplace to deploy a number of services on top of those resources. Some interesting case studies or user cases we've been working on and we've identified and among our customers and our user base. Gaming, for instance, it's one of the markets in which we're seeing that there's a gradual tendency to obviously improve the performance of gaming service by reducing latency, for instance, and putting things closer to the end user. Same applies to OTT services and live broadcasting. The capacity of using and pre-processing part of these services in some intermediate locations between the source and the consumer that helps a lot and reduces the workload that you have along the whole system. That's something we're actually working on a specific project on this, what we call the OpenNebula Media Cloud, and that's actually really promising. Obviously, in terms of the Internet of Things, there's a number of applications where which companies and public institutions need to run or deploy some services closer to the citizens and users. And again, having environmental providers or other providers, as we'll see in a second, having these resources closer to the end user really helps. Telcos are some of those organizations that are embracing edge computing as well, but in their case, they are embracing this concept as well as providers of resources. So as part of this movement, this central office re-architecture as a data center process, a telco company what they do normally is to try to transform their central offices into a small data center. So in that way, they can either virtualize things that they normally deploy as a physical device, like a router or something. What they can also do is to offer the resources that they have in these central offices, which are closer to the end users. They can offer those resources to third party. So you as a private company can just get some resources from a telco closer to your end user and then hire some and rent some resources there and run your application on demand. Things like VDI, desktop virtualization, if you want to deploy a virtual desktop infrastructure solution. In some cases, we've identified some use cases in which, for instance, in terms of data protection regulation, a company might want to deploy specific resources, internal resources, including virtual desktop, closer to their employees when they are working from home, for instance. In terms of for DevOps, in terms of Kubernetes deployment, there are some resources on our blog as well if you're interested into Kubernetes. But the this edge computing approach also helps in terms of running complex Kubernetes-based services and allows you to run Kubernetes clusters closer to the places where you actually need these capacities. So that's something that will be improving the integration we have with Kubernetes over the next months, because we know this is going to be interesting for a lot of users. And finally, if you want to give OpenNebula a try, there are different options. If you are running if you have your own VMware infrastructure, I will suggest you to download what we call V1 Cloud. It's our small evaluation tool. It's an appliance for you to run on VMware, and you can just try OpenNebula very quickly. A couple of 5-6 minutes, you can get it running. If you want to deploy very quickly as well, a single node KVM or LXD or Firecracker Cloud, you can do the same with what we call Mini One. You can get it on our website and have your single node OpenNebula Cloud running locally very quickly, or you can use an Amazon Web Services instance and give it a try. And again, I would like to invite you to have a look at the website. We have a landing page for these for the new version for OpenNebula 5.12. We'll be linking there some resources and tutorials and guides for you if you want to explore some of these different elements and different novelties that this new version brings along. Just feel free to do that and sign up for the newsletter, because there are really exciting things coming in the near future. So. Thank you for your attention. And if you need anything, just feel free to contact us or contact me, and we'll be happy to help and provide you some more news and information about all the stuff we're doing.